So, Paul, anyway, how are you? How are you doing? I should
Yeah, I'm
start by
very
asking.
good. Yeah, I'm very, very excited about Christmas and the end of the year coming up.
Great. And you are wearing a Christmas jumper as well?
I am, and you're
Oh,
gonna love this. Matching slippers.
oh my God, you've got matching
I have.
slippers. Oh, wow. I don't know what to say. Is it Debenhams? Because obviously Debenhams, you know I love Debenhams. Is it Debenhams before they go? Was it written
I
there?
think they might be ASOS or maybe even Boohoo who will be
Oh,
talking about it.
oh, get you, Paul. Boohoo. Wow. Okay, fair enough. Well, we have to first of all say before we start our commentary of the year that obviously Elizabeth has put on a fantastic event once again, and the lineup of speakers has been absolutely fantastic. I think it's so important that there is a platform for real representation, and it's testament to the excellent speakers that she's had throughout this series and her own hard work. This is a really successful event that's put on, and also all the work that she does also with mentoring and supporting BME pros within the profession. So we just wanted to say well done on this fantastic event.
I completely agree with you, B. I think, I mean, it's amazing at these times during COVID to organize such an amazing conference. And actually, it's not just been about learning, about PR, it's actually been about so many important subjects around politics and society. And it's covered things like health and science. There's been so much great content. So yeah, I hope people will continue to digest it until it's not available anymore in January, I think she said.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that, Paul. Well, we're going to kick off with our first topic. We're going to look back on 2020. And what we've tried to do is pull out some of the things that we have found to be interesting, exciting, a bit cringe. But essentially, we're going to look back on some of the hottest topics of 2020. But before we do, it'd be really good to start to hear your views, because we're going to kick off with talking about Black Lives Matters, but we're going to make it into quite a broad topic. So what would be interesting to hear from you is, thinking of the US, and obviously we've just had the presidential election and Joe Biden has won. Do you think Joe Biden will heal race relations in America? This is a really interesting topic because, well, we're keen to get your opinions and see what you think, but will there be that transformation? Will he be able to heal that divide? And we're going to start off by actually talking about Trump and his legacy of race relations in America. So obviously the election happened, and brilliant. Well, for those of us that support Biden as opposed to Trump, it was good news. From my perspective, it was kind of good over evil. I'll put it out there. That's how I see things, basically. But, America is still very much a divided country, and you've got to look at the stats as well. So interestingly, there was a big Latina shift towards Trump, which still kind of makes me a bit weary and kind of like, how did this happen, considering all the evil stuff he said, caging children, building the wall, etc. But at the same time, if you look at this in a more nuanced way, I suppose, you can't treat a cultural group as a monolith, and Latinas are themselves a diverse cultural and ethnic group of people. So there are various reasons as to why some Latinas in certain areas of the country voted for Trump. Nevertheless, Trumpism is not dead. All the hate, all the vile things that he said, he came into office and called Mexicans rapists, and he did some awful stuff. And he has gained so many more votes than he gained when he first came into office. I think it was 10 million votes actually that he gained in comparison to when he won the election last time. And so that's really disturbing to think that rhetoric, all of that hate and vile that he spews, there's still a lot of people who support him. I don't know what you think, Paul, in terms of his legacy and actually what will happen now in America.
I think we're on the same page for once, Bianesa. I think he's got a long history of racism, and from pushing stereotypes and pandering to white supremacists. If you think about COVID, he calls it the Chinese virus. He's talked about building a wall between the US and Mexico. It's all this really horrible imagery. This really, I just think we haven't been able to silence him. And I think some of those images, some of that language is going to last. I do think we have to remember, 74 million people still voted for Trump. that's a lot of people who still support him. So I think Biden will have, has got a bit of an uphill struggle to try and heal the country. Especially, like you say, there are a number of people from ethnic minority groups that did vote for Trump. And I guess there is something unique about Trump in terms of, there is an appeal there, isn't there? And I think there are some people who have decided that actually they can't vote Democrat because, some people have said they've gone too far to the left, they're too liberal. Trump does appeal to people who are pro-life, who are pro-God, who want a tougher economic approach to the US, who want to limit immigration. So I do think there are some issues that people, even if you're Black, Latino, whatever, you will see something in Trump that appeals to you, which is quite scary, which is quite worrying. But that's what I think Biden's up against.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because he gained more ground, this is Trump, with wealthy Americans this time round, and perhaps people with those conservative views. He did do better. It is scary. I mean, Biden, though, in terms of healing and can he heal the divisions, so far he's demonstrating things that you would like to think will at least visually help to show people that actually I'm going in a completely different direction. So he's met with kind of like civil rights groups, and they've advised him about what they want to see. And obviously we've seen that his comms team, for example, is made up of, well, it's all women, his comms team, and his transition administration team, I think it's basically 50-50 of people of color, which is the phrase that Americans like to use. So it's balanced. So, and also he's got this plan about building back better, and in that plan he's got racial equity as one of those key pillars. So he's moving in the right direction, but I just feel that Trump, and all the damage he's done in his 4 years, it's going to take a hell of a lot to reverse that. And also, the fact that he's the most popular Republican president in terms of number of votes ever, I don't think they're going to let him go. I think he could be back in 2024, and within that time, he'll be stirring the pot with more kind of racial segregation.
And not only not only could he be back in 4 years, but he's not disappearing in that time, is he? Be interesting to see if they really do take him off Twitter and try and silence him. But I think they'll find it very difficult to get rid of Trumpism. I think the conversation that he started is still going to be there. And I think Biden is, he's doing all the great stuff you've talked about, but the one thing I think he does need to look at is addressing the issue of people who voted against him, is looking at what is it that, may means he doesn't appeal to everyone. And I think that's something all countries need to look at, here as well. What is it that makes the left or, liberals so unappealing to some people, especially, when your other alternative is, is racism or, really unsavory characters. So that's where I think I'd like to see Biden, moving towards, is if he wants to heal people, he's got to, talk about the things that matter to Black people and people from ethnic minority backgrounds. But he also needs to look at how you bring, change the dialogue and, convince people that actually, there is a better way to do politics in America.
Yeah, I agree. What's going on in the chat box, Paul? What are people saying?
We've got Talia has said Biden certainly can't hinder race relations. I completely agree with that. I think he certainly, things certainly won't go backwards.
It can't. That'd be terrible if
this is definitely a move forward. And then Jess D has said Trump's brought racist opinions to the forefront. I completely agree with that. The way Trump just, uses racist languages in, just to talk about policy and just everyday language. His immigration policy is build a wall to keep out the Mexicans, using racist terms to, talk politics. It's just disgraceful. But yeah, that's what we're up against.
It is. And I think if we kind of turn now to look at some of the other big stories that are connected to that here in the UK. I mean, this one really riles me because it's connected. It's all around kind of like Black Lives Matter and what's been the impact of Black Lives Matter in the killing of George Floyd. This one riles me, Paul. This is the National Trust, right? So the National Trust, obviously it's a charity. They have several kind of buildings and grounds that they look after of national importance, national treasures, some may say. Anyhow, so they've done this report that links more than 100 of their properties to slavery and colonialism. That is history, right? This is fact. And they've done this, you know, off the back of the killing of George Floyd, and they wanted to raise more awareness of this. I think this is a good thing. I think this is essentially just telling the truth. It's telling the truth of history. National Trust, if you go into a building or visit anywhere, what's wrong in highlighting the history? Saying that, you've had 60 Tory MPs, they call themselves a common sense group, but I don't see any common sense here. Essentially, they've organised a meeting, or about to meet the Charity Commission, to discuss the status of organisations like the National Trust, who they say have denigrated British history and heritage. I mean, essentially, these are people who are scared of Britain's history and don't want it spoken about. That's what I think. And I think it's almost like a type of censorship, because they don't like the reality of what Britain was. It's our history, for goodness sake. Why are you so scared of what has happened? Well, I mean, what do you think about this?
I completely agree. I think it's mad that, you know, for example, we all gather once a year to look back at World War II and commemorate the loss of life. You know, history is a part of our modern life. We're always looking back. We can't ignore history. We can't ignore where we've come from. And I think what I'm more worried about actually is this kind of war on wokeness. And, you know, I'm guilty of it. You know, if I hear something I don't like, I'll say, oh, you're just too woke, you know. But actually, politicians and, you know, people who don't like, you know, people who have, you know, want to talk about the past, just kind of say, oh, you're too woke, you're a snowflake. We have to be really careful about that, because actually it's diverting us away from talking about history and addressing, you know, the suffering that some people still, you know, a lot of people still experience because of history. And, you know, a lot of the issues with racism that we still experience today are because of long held views that go back centuries. So it is important that we talk about these things. I think it's important that the National Trust is highlighting the fact that many of the, you know, the items in their properties have come at a human cost. You know, you know, people have suffered to create some of these products, you know, whether it's furniture or whatever, that are now sitting in this lovely home. And yeah, we can walk around and appreciate the beauty of it, but actually there's a wider story to where these products have come from. So I think it is important. It really winds me up as well when people say, oh, you're getting political, because it's not political. It's just the right thing to do. It's just history. Racism is wrong, and, you know, we shouldn't be ignoring it.
I agree. I mean, it's beggars belief to think that, you know, people are scared of the truth, and they're trying to find ways to suppress the truth. And you're right. I think there's something wider going on in society, and maybe this, you know, stems from Trump, etc., and all of that, where people seem to be now so open to being racist. Essentially, it seems to be people, you know, before people kept it, you know, they were racist, but they kept it to themselves or kept it to their own quarters. Now they're just out there, people expressing racist views, and it's quite disturbing. And if we turn to kind of Sainsbury's, because that's the other story, another highlight, if you like, well, it's a low light of 2020. I mean, people were losing their, because there was an advert that featured a black family people, that's all it featured, you know, talking about Christmas, memories of Christmas. You know, I think it's called the Gravy Song advert. And people were kicking up a stink because they said they didn't feel represented in this advert, because for one time there was a black family on an advert. People were essentially being racist in terms of their comments on social media, but it was just a flood of racism on there because one black family featured in a advert. I mean, what's that all about, Paul.
I know, it's bonkers, isn't it? And sites like Twitter give these people a voice. And you know my view on Twitter. I personally, I think it should probably be closed down by now. The fact it's given people a platform and can't deal with these people is my case in point. But in the very least, those people should be shut down. But it reminds us essentially that Britain's still a racist country. It's it's as simple as that. And like you say, we seem to have this culture in the last few years where people are able to just say it, and what they'll do is say, oh, if you don't like it, you're being political, or if you're trying to challenge it, it's political, and we saw it when people talked about what's the meaning of Black Lives Matter, and people say, well, no, all lives matter. And you think, again, you're avoiding the point of talking about racism, and you're talking about semantics, or you're saying the movement's about Marxism. No, let's talk about the fundamental fact that there are Black people and people of color with all various backgrounds who are finding it, who are not getting jobs, who are being put in prison because they shouldn't, for no reason. It's just ridiculous. And actually, I'm very pleased that Sainsbury's stood their ground and basically said, oh, if you don't like it, go and shop somewhere else. But then they actually united with other supermarkets, and that was brilliant. So I don't know where these people who don't like Black people are now going to shop. Maybe they'll be starving somewhere.
Indeed, Paul. Well, we've got a comment here from Lucy Thomas, who says it's the lazy culture war diversion tactic. It boils my blood. We agree. I think we both agree. And then we've got, sorry if I'm pronouncing your name incorrectly, Asia, who says that racism is the last trick in the box to stop working class white people and people of colour from coming together in power. Agreed, totally. What I think should happen is that more brands based on this should have more Black people in their adverts next year. Yes, I'm all for it, Paul. I'm all for it.
I love it.
Indeed. Well, let's move on to another topic, shall we? Let's move on to, actually, this is probably the main topic of 2020. This was the big highlight, and we're still in it now, and it's COVID. I think we'll start off by asking you guys a question, actually, again, just to gauge opinions and views. So, has the government's response to COVID undermined your trust in the vaccine? So that'd be really interesting to find out your views on that, because I think it has, well, speaking for myself, not that I'm not having the vaccine, but I think it has undermined their behaviour, and their handling of the whole COVID crisis has definitely undermined trust. I think I looked at a YouGov poll just today, actually, to see what the latest is, and only 39% of people think that the government is handling the issue well, or somewhat well. And I think that says a lot. There have been so many blunders, Paul, from start to finish in the handling of COVID, whether it was from the very beginning when Boris Johnson didn't take it seriously, and I don't know where he was, but he wasn't at those Gold Command meetings like he should have been. He was somewhere else. And, there was a lot of complacency at the very beginning. We locked down late, and the data, and there's been so many things. I mean, giving the contracts to their chums, it's never ending. I mean, what do you think? Do you trust the government on this?
I don't trust the government on a lot of things. And so I do think it's important that we understand how are the decisions made around the vaccine, and that, if there's an independent regulator there who will decide which vaccines we get. And I really want to see and hear from more of those people, and not see gormless Matt Hancock, taking the credit and pretending to cry on TV and all of that rubbish. But if I look back at COVID and the government's handling, I think there have been some positives in that the campaign started really well. And, with stay at home, at NHS, save lives, there was a good campaign, short, simple, sharp messages, but then they just lost the plot. It was just like, it did start well. But, and I think things like the TV conferences, they were brilliant, seeing Laura Kuenssberg and, Robert Peston there challenging the government, holding them to account, but also seeing local newspapers. We saw diverse titles, we saw The Voice asking questions. I think they kind of were being open, but a lot of it was an illusion of openness. Because like you say, we saw contracts being given to friends and to chums, and, we've seen, stats that aren't quite the full picture. And then the messaging has just been all over the place, from tiers and, what tier are you in? And from, what's his name, Cummins going off to Barnard Castle, it's just been ridiculous. And that press conference he held in the Rose Garden. So yeah, I completely think we've had mixed messaging, we've had promises that have been broken. And so I think trust in the government's been undermined. And so I think it's vital now that we do hear from some authoritative voices when it comes to the vaccine, especially because, we know that there are people who, are anti-vaxxers and who don't trust vaccinations anyway. But, if we're going to get through this, we do need people to, take the vaccine and help, help us find a cure and move forward.
Yeah, I agree with all of that, Paul. I think it's such a shame that the government have not handled this well at all, and that have their, and don't get me wrong, this I know people use this phrase unprecedented circumstances, and we know it is, but I still feel that, for example, the PPE scandal, they knew that we would need PPE, and there was this shortage, and we had to kind of like scrabble around to get PPE. That was embarrassing, and that's something I think that they should have prepared for. And I believe in their scenario planning for pandemics, when and I'm not going to, it's not the NHS, this is the other thing that they were trying to do, pin this on the NHS. It's not the NHS. In their own planning, government planning for pandemics and scenarios like this, they should have been stocked with things like this. It was known that, something like a pandemic, there were various projections about things like this happening. And also they knew from China that this was not something simple, that it was turning into a full-blown pandemic, and they didn't act. I think they made lots of mistakes, and sadly, people, have lost their lives as a result of, I'm going to call it incompetence, sorry, putting it out there, as a result of incompetence by the government. And it's sad. And even things like the investigation into the disproportionate effect of COVID on Black and minority ethnic people, we've not really had much still that's come out of it. So, for example, in terms of, for example, the vaccine even, I don't think Black and minority ethnic people are on that list of people that should be higher up the list. For example, if you're elderly and you're from Black and minority ethnic background, we're not even on that list. I don't know, as a result of that investigation, what measures have been put in place to help. I really don't know. And I think for me personally, I think I lost trust in the government quite early on. And in terms of following rules and regulations, it did become, and I'm not saying it is Dominic Cummings that made this decision for me, but I think there was a point where I thought, you know what, I can't follow what Boris Johnson is saying. He's not going to protect me. I'm going to have to read up on stuff myself and make my own decisions. And I think a lot of people have done that. And sadly, I think, we're in a different situation now, but some people took the decision earlier on that they weren't going to protect themselves or other people and just were going to flout the rules. And it's because there were so many mixed messages that that's what ended up happening, which is not the situation that you want in a pandemic.
I think you said it was incompetence. I think there's a lot of incompetence, but I think some of it was also actually consciously making decisions about, who they want to protect and what they want to prioritize. So I think, for example, they decided that I imagine there's some figure that they have that is an acceptable number of people to die. And as long as we don't hit that figure, it's okay, because then they started to prioritize the economy and prioritize politics over lives. And so I actually think they probably do think, as long as we don't get to whether, as long as it's not 500,000, that's okay, because it does feel like they haven't thought about the human cost and, about lives. They have just been, we're opening up the shops again. We still don't, London's going crazy. People are breaking the rules because, people don't trust. And I think some of that has been an actual political decision that they've made. You talked about doing your own research. That's actually, I think that's partly as well what they hoped is, Boris has said a few times, oh, people have got to make their own decisions. You know, you've got to, you know, work out for yourself what you do at Christmas, that kind of thing. That's kind of where people I think are going. You know, we can't trust government. You know, this government, you know, it's a conservative government, doesn't really like, you know, putting restrictions on people. So at the end of the day, people are having to make their own decisions, and yeah, lives have been lost.
I mean, what happened to follow the science? Do you remember that was the kind of key phrase at the start? Whatever we'll do, we'll follow the science, we'll follow the science. And then they kind of stopped following the science. And then we had Eat Out to Help Out, where everyone was supposed to go out and not follow the science and protect the economy. And, you know, there was Rishi Sunak in whatever restaurant he was in without a mask and all of that stuff. And yeah, you're right. The balance shifted whereby, and I know this, governments have to balance the economy and health, and one affects the other. I get that. But I think there was a point where we literally lost it, and it was all literally about the economy. And you're right, even now, if we look at Christmas and the potential, and obviously there's people watching this from different parts of the country, but if we talk about London and the possibility of going into tier 3, you know, there's all these danger signs, but at the same time, I've heard obviously the rules about Christmas that you can mix households, but then on the other hand, I've heard someone else, another government minister, saying, well, don't do what you don't, you know, don't do things you don't need to do. So it's kind of this contradictory message. And that's why I think people will make their own choices and their own decisions in this.
Yeah, I think you're right. If we look at the chat box, we see Lucy saying it started well, but yeah, it was the illusion of openness. Asia's saying the Johnson Tory party were only put in power to deliver Brexit. They're completely incompetent in every other function. Remember, the ideology of this party is in direct conflict with the belief that this state can actually do anything for its citizens.
Good point. Very good.
Yep.
Yeah.
Jess is saying, yep, the government hasn't handled the pandemic well at all. Lucy saying, no, until the scientists gave them the side eye when they were talking crap. Yeah, that's the thing. That was always going to be a challenge for them. You know, your incompetent minister and then your scientists on the side. And you know, I loved it when the journalists started saying, yeah, you answer a question, Boris, but then I've also got a question for Professor JBT, and I've got a question for, you know, the others. And actually you could see the tension there between the politics and the health and the science. And yeah, and I think it's been a really interesting time, I think, for comms wise in terms of, you know, how do you balance those messages? It's really challenging. But yeah, they promised to follow the science and they haven't, and put lives at risk.
Well, I mean, the good news is that the vaccine is here. It's starting to be administered. That is good news. And like you say, I think we don't want ministers fronting this campaign because there's too much. They've got too much baggage. Essentially, we need the scientists and, check this out, Paul, influencers. What do you think about this? Influencers.
So I actually think we desperately need some influencers to help us get the messages back on track and to encourage people to take the vaccine. And unfortunately, we have some, I wouldn't call them influencers, but, you know, we've seen, you know, Sky News and their team all go out and break the rules. And, you know, to some extent, they're not influencers, but they're people who have influence and who are listened to. And there are, you know, Rita Ora and, you know, such people who are just breaking the rules, and actually that has an impact. So yeah, I do think we do need some sensible people, some scientists, some celebs who, you know, have their heads screwed on straight to help communicate some of these messages.
So when you say celebs who have their heads screwed on straight, so I'm taking it like a Joey Essex wouldn't work for you.
Well, to be honest, I guess it's one of those things where if he says the things that I agree with and he encourages people to go and take the jab, then yeah, because we need to appeal to all audiences. So those influences might be, you know, a religious leader in a community. It might be someone from Love Island. it might be someone on Strictly. I don't know. Lucy suggesting Danny Dyer.
He talks a lot of sense, actually.
Yeah.
He talks a lot of sense. And he appeals to, I don't know, when you could say the common man or woman, as in Joe Bloggs. He actually talks a lot of sense. I know he's also, you know, in EastEnders, and I picture him as that character, but he is a man of the people. So that's not a bad suggestion, actually. That's not a bad suggestion at all. Well, I think we should move on to another highlight, low light of 2020. And this is about Boohoo. And this is really interesting because Boohoo is, I guess it's if we forget what has happened for now, and then we'll talk about what's happened, they were the pinnacle of kind of like a story of rags to riches, how they started, you know, British company, just from nothing to this kind of multi-million pound empire. However, we all know that there's a lot of stuff that have happened to Boohoo behind the scenes. So in the summer, there was a Sunday Times investigation which basically uncovered that workers were being paid well below the minimum wage, and that there were really bad working conditions in their kind of, not factory, but kind of like a factory in Leicester. And then later on this year, in October, one of their suppliers was found to have committed fraud, a VAT fraud, and money laundering as well. And so they took them off their kind of like suppliers list. But essentially, they've had a lot of scandal. Now, what they did cleverly from a commerce perspective, although it had a massive knock-on effect on their share price, is they said, look, we want to do better. We are going to get on board this QC to do this investigation and write a report for us. We're going to bring all these people onto kind of our audit committee. We want to clean up. We want to do better. And the QC, Paul's not buying this. He's shaking his head. I'm expecting an eye roll anytime soon. The QC basically said that the company did too little too late with regards to changing their working practices. I mean, it strikes me that, you know, people are still out there buying Boohoo on Black Friday, considering they've had all this stuff in terms of how they treat people, their working practices. They were selling on Black Friday shoes for 34 pence, or the equivalent of 34 pence. They were selling dresses for 11 pence. How does that even happen? And they had some stuff that was 99% off full price. That does not, to me, sound like a company that's trying to shift perceptions around basically slave labor.
They're trying to shift perceptions, but they're not really trying to change and make a difference. And I don't know, everyone always gets surprised when they see that these multi-million companies are doing these unsavory practices. You know, it's just capitalism. It's the way things go, and we can't rely on companies to change themselves. And if governments don't step in, things aren't going to change. You know, they all talk about, you know, ESG and CSR and doing better, but no, they're there to make money. And the fact is, they're there to make money and to line their own pockets, and that's what their focus was. And if COVID hadn't happened and we hadn't gone investigating in Leicester, that factory would still be going, you know, and the VAT frauds would still be going, and the money laundering would still continue. I just think, you know, this is just the life of capitalism, and we need to actually, you know, whether it's government or whatever, we need to actually tackle it in a different way. The fact is also that people want their stuff. You know, people haven't stopped shopping at Boohoo. So people do say, oh, it's really worrying, you know, all the influencers are going to turn on them. Boohoo sales rocketed by 45% during the COVID pandemic. We talk about, you know, let's talk about Amazon. We've talked about their working processes, you know, everyone uses them. We've talked about companies like Vodafone and Starbucks not paying taxes. People still use them. So I think these companies just do enough to give this veneer of being ethical and this veneer of all good governance. We're socially responsible, but they're not. They're out for themselves and just want to line their pockets.
Oh, get you, Paul, get you. This is probably going to surprise you. So I agree with what you're saying about Boohoo, but generally, and this will probably surprise you because you know how I am, but I don't think ESG, CSR. I don't think it's a bad thing. I think there are companies out there that genuinely do care, and they have these governance procedures in place because they do want to make a difference. They do know that consumers want to buy things from companies that actually are making a difference, a good, positive difference to our lives, to society, to the world. Because yeah, you're right, people are still buying from Boohoo and for various reasons, and maybe that's a younger demographic, I don't know, but then younger people are supposed to be more conscious and care more. But I do think in Paul shaking his head is like, nah, that's not true. I do think ESG, it's a good thing, and investors drive the need for change within business. I don't think governments do really do much. Obviously, there's this kind of like regulatory frameworks, but I think primarily it's investors that drive how businesses behave. And yeah, I think Boohoo is a bad example, and they've not done well, and it's terrible what they've done. And I don't understand why people are still shopping from them. But I have to say, I do think ESG, that's environmental social governance, indicators for businesses, are a good thing, and it's good that investors push companies to have these standards.
Yeah, I don't know. I think these ESG measures, they're three randomly unconnected areas that give you a metric, and I just think, well, it's clearly, I don't know whether a PR company came up with them, probably to try and help, in addition to people's greenwashing and creating this veneer of being ethical and socially responsible. But I don't know. I just don't trust it. I don't buy it. And the fact is, if governments don't do something about it, then actually people vote with their purses and their wallets, don't they? So it's consumers probably that will drive change. And ultimately, if people keep going to Boohoo, Mr. Boohoo's going to keep, lining his pockets. And, he'll do a few things. He'll bring, I think he's brought in Leveson to help make some changes, and, they'll do enough to convince the stock market. But yeah, some investors will decide it's not for them, but there's still investors out there who will decide to continue putting their money into these industries because it makes them money.
Well, it's a few comments here actually. So from Harriet, she's saying, I wonder whether it was right for Channel 4 to air a TV show giving them publicity after the scandal. Fair point there, Harriet. A good point as well. Jess D is saying that the influencers will never turn on Boohoo. Do you think that's true, Paul? Do you think they will? Do you think they'll just continue kind of?
I mean, there's a whole discussion we can have about influencers and how they're paid and that relationship, because actually, if you're being paid by Boohoo to promote them, you probably won't turn on them. And we did see that. We saw a few influencers say, what they were doing was unacceptable, but there are still loads of influencers who are still supporting them. So I think, yeah, especially younger influencers who, again, just look at the money. And I'm sure that if it looked like influencers were turning on them, Boohoo would probably just pay them a bit more, and they'll find other people to promote them.
Interesting. So Talia is saying that we need to spend with power. I like that phrase, spend with power. People want to complain, but they need to put their money where their mouth is. No to Boohoo, Amazon, etc. That is very fair points. I have to admit though, during lockdown, I have been helping to build Jeff Bezos's 50th swimming pool. I've been at Amazon because this is the thing, it's convenient. You want something, it comes the next day, and you don't, particularly during lockdown. And Talia, don't knock me for this, but particularly during lockdown, it was the convenience factor.
How do you sleep at night?
Very well. You shop at Amazon as well. Come on. That's the thing, though. It's convenience, isn't it? It's the convenience.
Yeah, but I'm not the one that's then complaining about. I accept, though, this is the way of the world, and unless we do something about it. Yeah, it's just. I mean, I'm not saying it's right, but I just think we need to get beyond this whole. Oh, as long as they do this ESG stuff, it's fine. I think actually that it's so much more deeply ingrained. It goes right back to how whether it's your hiring practices, how you treat people, what your factory's like. But yeah, I think you can do some tick box stuff, but it's more than that. And actually, it's actually the consumers are the ones to blame. As Talia says, we the consumer need to do better, but I don't think we will do better unless there's further change, and that's probably where we do need government to step in.
But then when you say government step in, what role can they play? Are they going to look at all companies, and what role can they play? Can they practically play in this?
Well, from things like, we have rules and regulations already about working conditions, which are very important, but clearly somewhere like Boohoo hasn't followed them. So we probably need tough, I don't know what the consequences have been for Boohoo, whether it's fining or someone being in the dock or, facing time in prison. I don't know. But, there needs to be consequences for this. We've talked about organizations not paying their tax, but HMRC is kind of selective about which ones it chases. So actually sometimes government's complicit in this and is allowing it to happen. But I think it probably needs more of a change. I'm starting to sound like your mate Jeremy Corbyn on some of this. God.
Come on, Paul. You are deep down, you are a proper left winger. There's no point in denying it.
I've never denied it.
Oh dear. Speaking of left wingers,
God, here we go.
Let's talk about another headline of 2020. And obviously we have a new, well, not so new anymore, but Labour leader. Do you know what the thing about Paul is, and for those of you who can't hear, it's all in his expressions. It's all in his expressions. Anyway, Keir Starmer, your best friend, is the Labour leader. And actually, before we kick off, again, people, do you think the Labour Party can win under Keir Starmer? Be interested to know your thoughts about this, because I personally, and this is where Paul and I are going to disagree, but I think that we can. I think the Labour Party can win under Keir Starmer. The reason being is that he is everything that Boris Johnson isn't. And we need people recognise, look at all, basically, if you look at Boris Johnson, he's fumbling, he's unsure about himself, he's a bit of a blowhard, he's just not serious. He's just not serious, basically. He's not serious as a leader. I don't think he has the competency to run this country. He doesn't. And he got to the position of being leader, but we've seen through COVID, we've seen through Brexit, which we'll talk about in a minute, that he's just not leadership material at all. Keir Starmer, in terms of how he ranks, he's the third most popular Labour politician. Yeah, Paul. He's again, it's all in his body language. Third most popular Labour politician. YouGov have said that people who support him describe him as confident, admirable, assured, insightful.
Did you write
and
this?
Commanding? Yes, all the things Boris Johnson isn't. And this is also backed up by the latest poll. Again, I checked this today because I knew you would come down hard on me. I checked this today. And actually, if you look at the voting intention nationwide, Labour, it's 40%, Tories, 37%. So I think, based on those things alone, and this is just a very small snippet, I think, for sure, Labour can win under Keir Starmer. Go on then, sock it to me, Paul.
No, they can't. I mean, and the polls are interesting. I just think over this last year, given what this party that's in power has put this country through, how is Sir Keir only just getting to around 40%? All the way along, it's been, even the height of it, Boris and his fools were still commanding the lead. It was ridiculous. Bumbling Boris, and all the mistakes you talked about earlier, Sir Keir still couldn't command a lead, and he's still struggling to command a lead, and that's because he's simply uninspiring. His party is he's bland, he's rudderless, he has no vision, he's dull and boring, and to some extent I think that's what we need, but we also need a vision. He doesn't talk to me, and it really, when I know you listened to the Desert Island Discs interview on Radio 4, and I just thought, oh God, this man is awful. That was his time. The great thing about Desert Island Discs is that you can just talk, you can give a vision, you can talk about your past and your history. Nothing came from Sakir. It was just dull, dull, dull. Boris, you know, again, I don't want to defend Boris, but there's personality, there's vision, where, you know, whatever it is, he's free, you know, we're going to build back better and all that stuff. I can see how he inspires people. I don't always agree with it, but he's getting people behind him. And, you know, and a few weeks ago, when we should have been talking about Priti Patel being sacked, rather than Keir coming forward with his approach and, you know, challenging the government, so instead we were talking about Sir Keir and, you know, his argument still with Corbyn. You know, this man who's meant to unite this party, you know, under new leadership and all of that, hasn't happened. The party seems to be more divided under Sir Keir to me. And I don't know whether the party needs to split or separate or what, but Sir Keir is just, is going nowhere really. And, you know, you said he's confident, and I just feel he needs to be a more dominant figure in some way. You know, Marcus Rashford's having more impacts than he is, you know, and I think the perception is important. And it's not just about, you know, it's not just about personality, but really it is. You know, we do need a vision. We need a personality. We need someone that we're going to feel like, yeah, that's the man that's going to lead us. And it's not Sir Keir at the moment.
Well, I disagree with you, Paul. I mean, you say that Boris Johnson has got personality. I don't think he's got any sort of personality. Maybe it's personality for, you know, joking around and all the rest of it, but he doesn't have the personality that we need for a leader. And I do think, you know, Keir Starmer is level-headed. We need that kind of reasoned approach to things. We need structure, and I believe that he will bring structure to the country and what we need. We don't need a joker. We don't need someone who's got like bags of charisma. We just need someone who's competent and can get the job done. If you look at all the personalities around the world, what are they doing? You could say that Trump is a personality, but look what type of personality he is. Look at Bolsonaro. What, you know, all these people are personalities, but what are they actually doing for their people? I would rather we have someone who is mediocre, doesn't need to impress me with their personality or be charismatic. I just need them to be competent and to get the job done. And also, as someone, I'll put it out there, you guys probably know this already because I don't hide it, but as someone who has Labour values, I want to see a society, and I'm gonna pick it up from where Corbyn left off, because I actually believe this part of what he said, is that I want a society that is for the many and not the few. That is what I want to see. And I think Labour, traditional Labour values actually came to the fore during this pandemic, because the Conservatives have had to look at socialist type interventions to help the country get back on track. Furlough, for example, they've had to look at helping people, putting their hands in their pocket and investing in people. And that's not a typical Conservative trait. So, you know, we do need socialism. I know some people, it's a dirty word, but we do need socialism in this world, because it's about fairness, it's about equity, it's about equality. That's forget the characters who are leading this. That is what traditional Labour values are about, and I think we need that, definitely. And yes, the party is divided. Sorry, I'm going on a bit, but yes, the party is divided. But show me a party that isn't divided. All political parties, the Conservatives are divided. Political parties are always a broad church. You're never going to have unity across the piece. It's just a shame that Labour's infighting has not been sorted out. And, you know, obviously the stuff with Corbyn, etc. We don't need that to be happening now, because it is a distraction, and a united party is one that has a better ability to win elections. We don't need the internal fighting now. We need the party to come together, because, yeah, that's the only way we're going to basically defeat the Tories. Put it out there. There you go.
Yeah, I mean, that's fine for you. I mean, you're obviously a big stormtrooper, and you'll follow him to the end of the earth on his horse. But the fact is, you have all these beliefs, but I don't know any of that stuff. You follow him. I don't know him. He's never spoken to me. He's not said anything that appeals
to me
no
either.
vision. And actually, the things you said, kind of, you know, the fact that we have this Tory party that's adopting these socialist approaches, makes me wonder even more what the point of Sir Keir is. You know, if the Tories are doing the things that you like, you're welcoming these interventions by the Tory party. Are you going to be voting for them at the next election? Then that's what it sounds like you're saying to me. So
Well,
what
I
is
bet
the
a load
point
of
of
cobblers.
Sir Keir? You know, he's just pointless. And you know, and the fact is, Labour aren't home and dry. They are doing better in the polls, but people still don't trust their management of the economy. I've not heard anything from Sir Keir on what he's going to do about the economy. People say they're too left wing. And it's funny, you know, left wing's always used as an insult and, you know, you're too left wing. But, you know, actually, he does need to address this whole thing about being too socialist, too left wing by turning it into actual policies. Yeah, we have an issue in this country where there are people who voted Tory because they don't like immigration. So Keir's going to have to talk about immigration. People need to understand where he stands. But I don't know what he just doesn't seem to talk about anything. He's had, I think, 2 or 3 speeches, and all he's talked about is we're under new management. You know, it's like he's opening a new corner shop or something and he's taking over. I'm under new management. Well, good for you, but actually talk to me. Tell me what you're going to do for me.
You know
Not
what? Oh,
be an oaster. Talk to me.
Delightful. I agree with part of what you said in the sense that I think they do need to come forward now, and maybe this will happen after the COVID crisis. I don't know, but they do need to come forward sharpish with actual policies, because you're right. It's been pretty easy to kind of actually they've done a good job in terms of COVID. They've supported the government where they think they supported the government where they think it's the right decision for the country. They were not, just disagreeing with them for the sake of disagreeing because they're in opposition. And I think that's a good approach. I think we're all tired of Punch and Judy politics. You want to see actually solutions and people come together for the better of the country. But I do think you're right. They do need to come forward with actually these are our policies. This is what we believe in, and they need to be more assertive in that regard. So on that, I'll agree with you. Just on that though. What?
I'm happy to leave it there.
Oh, all right. What's the chat box saying? Saying, Paul?
The country loves the Conservatives. And I think that's a good point there from Nairi, that actually we've got to remember this country, I think, is ultimately a Conservative country. And it's, Labour, if they can't convince people during this pandemic to vote for them, I don't know when they can, they've done it a handful of times before, but, it's a real uphill battle. And I don't know what Sir Keir is doing. He's biding his time maybe, but really this was the opportunity, I feel, that he's missed it. For the many, not the few is a great motto, says Tali. And according to the papers today, there were 2 or 3 big speeches planned for the new year, setting out the vision and policies. That's what Lucy's saying. So, maybe we will see something. Let's look forward to it. I'll try and keep awake while he's talking.
Always with the sly digs, always throwing shade. Right. I think we are kind of about to wrap up, but before we do, we just want to quickly say a couple of things about Brexit, because that's the other big thing that's happening right here, right now. And just on Brexit, I mean, where the hell are we? We've got until Sunday to get this thing done. Lastminute.com, this oven-ready deal, it is... What's happened? I mean, he's not taken the bloody thing out of the fridge. It's still in the fridge, waiting to go into the microwave. There is no oven-ready deal.
I mean, this thing's been lies from the start. If you look back, we had that bus, so we were told that we were going to save all these millions to put back in the NHS. That was all lies. We've now been told it's an Australian deal. An Australian deal is no deal. We were told it was oven ready. It doesn't even exist. It's chaos and it's mad, and no one's prepared for it. And who knows what's going to happen in the next few weeks.
Oh God, exactly. And I have to just say this very quickly because we're about to wrap up. But I'm sorry, I know this is really like petty in relation to the bigger picture. But did you see the suit he was wearing? Did you see the suit he was wearing when he went to meet the Europeans? I mean, what a disgrace!
You know what? You're not going to like it, but part of that is what I don't know. There's that he's kind of like Trump in that way. There's a unique appeal. Boris is Boris, and he gets elected, and Trump, and you've got Keir, who's just bland and grey. But yeah, Boris represents us on the world stage. He represented London, and yeah, don't like his suits. I think his hair looks ridiculous, but
It's awful. It's
he appeals to
awful.
people.
Doesn't appeal to me. I mean, if you can't do the basics and find a suit that fits your backside, then there are real issues, real issues.
I think
I
some
was
of it was show as well, you know. I think some of this, right, I'm going to rush over there at the last minute. I'm going to try and do a deal. And then that video that he's put out on Twitter with, yeah, we've got Australia, you know, it's all this last minute bluster to try and make it sound like he's, you know, he's saving the country. But yeah, it's
God.
being OSIF for PM.
Yes. Thanks, whoever made that comment. Paul, after this, Paul will have words and he won't like it. Wow, I mean, it's been an interesting just under an hour that we've had with you guys. It's been so much fun. It's been our first ever live show, so thank you so much for joining us. Just to make you aware, we do have the podcast, as we said, News Bants. We record every couple of weeks or so. So do check us out. We're on Twitter at News Bants.
We're also on Instagram at News Bants.
And yeah, do subscribe. We're also on YouTube as well, because I don't know, we are. So check us out on YouTube.
Spotify, we're everywhere. Type News Bants in and you'll find us.